What's going on, guys? Dare here with Fantasy Football Advice, coming at you with another fantasy football video. Today, you read the title, so you know what time it is. We are going over our 2021 way too early rankings. Since this is going to be the first video in this series, we are going to start with the first round. More specifically, we are going to be talking about our top 10 players if we were forced to be drafting today. As mentioned though, this is way too early. We're still in the playoffs. Free agency hasn't even begun yet. So when we are ranking and breaking down these players, we will veer a bit away from talking about impacts from free agency as well as the NFL draft. And considering these are the top 10 players in all of fantasy, most of them, their roles will be impacted minimally at best from these types of transactions anyway. I also want to give you guys a friendly reminder to like this video if you do enjoy, subscribe to the channel if you're new, and also our website is still completely free. If you're getting the itch to continue playing fantasy, we're still posting content on there as well. So if you want to dabble into some DraftKings, maybe get ahead of your 2021 research, our website is not only a great source for that, it's also completely free. Link for that is in the description box below. But with that, let's get into these 2021 rankings. Starting at the top, the 101, if we were to be the first overall pick for the 2021 fantasy season, we would still be drafting Christian McCaffrey. This is now going to be the second season in a row in which Christian McCaffrey is our top overall fantasy pick, but it's for good reason. Most of our leagues that we play in, as well as the general fantasy community, is half PPR or full PPR. In those types of leagues, Christian McCaffrey, he's an absolute monster. Throughout his career at the running back position, he's been able to average over 6 receptions per game, making him one of the highest floor options in the entire league when it comes to fantasy football. Despite him being a consensus first round pick, even last season, there were still a couple question marks we had heading into that year. Of course, Cam Newton was no longer a Panther, replaced by Teddy Bridgewater. Bridgewater and his injury history made it a bit difficult to trust that he would play for the entire season. In addition to that, while a capable stopgap, we weren't sure if he would have the type of game-breaking upside that we saw from Cam Newton. Would they have as many scoring opportunities? Would Teddy Bridgewater even target Christian McCaffrey at the same rate? But even with all of those concerns, that still wasn't enough for us to push him outside of that number 1 overall pick spot. Now that the 2020 season has concluded and we've seen that Teddy Bridgewater is more than capable of supporting multiple fantasy relevant players, including Mike Davis, who is taking over for Christian McCaffrey this year, a player who himself finished as a top 12 fantasy back in PPR leagues despite playing in just 15 games. That gives us more than enough confidence to say that even with Teddy Bridgewater at the helm, Christian McCaffrey is a locked and loaded top 5 fantasy back with top 1 overall upside. Throughout his career, he's been a player to average over 23 fantasy points per game in PPR leagues, and this is no small sample either. We're talking over a whopping 50 games. We're moving on though to the 2021 second overall pick, which would be none other than Dalvin Cook of the Minnesota Vikings. To start, Dalvin Cook's 2020 season was nothing short of phenomenal. He actually finished the year as the RB2 overall in PPR leagues, exactly where we have him ranked, and surprisingly, there's actually room for him to grow and expand on that fantasy production for the 2021 season. For starters, there are a lot of reasons to like where this offense is heading for 2021. Justin Jefferson, as we know, the rookie who finished just outside the top 5 for fantasy. This is a player who, as a rookie, put up 88 receptions on 125 targets, compiling 1,400 yards and 7 touchdowns. Considering heading into the season, there were concerns for the overall passing volume. To say he exceeded expectations would be an understatement, but with both him and Adam Thielen set to return, Irv Smith, who looked good in flashes while healthy, it leaves a lot to be excited about for this team offensively for 2021. Admittedly, Dalvin Cook, he may not come in with the best health record of any running back in this range, but as we say in every season, you can't draft scared. Safe picks, they bust as well. So avoiding Dalvin Cook for that reason, a player who averaged over 24 PPR fantasy points per game, to me, I just don't see how you can do that if you have the second overall pick. Moving into the third overall pick, the reigning rushing leader, we have Derrick Henry of the Tennessee Titans. 2020 is actually going to mark the second season in a row in which Derrick Henry led the league in this area. Unfortunately though, rushing yards and rushing touches, rushing production, it may not be as dollar per dollar valuable as work in the receiving game, an area where Derrick Henry is a bit lacking. But regardless, Henry's involvement, Henry's workload, and flat out Derrick Henry's ability, it more than makes up for the lack of production in that area, giving Derrick Henry one of the highest floors for any running back who mainly gets his production from rushing over receiving. You don't need me to tell you, Derrick Henry eclipsed the 2,000 yard rushing mark, a feat very few running backs in the NFL ever accomplish. And results oriented aside, this is still a player who received over 300 touches on the ground in back-to-back seasons. Derrick Henry actually now ranks top 20 all time at single season rush attempts, coming in at the 19th overall in that area. So when it comes to volume, that's definitely something we can expect from Derrick Henry. And while other rushers would bring in a major injury concern due to that amount of volume, especially in the run game, typically an area more taxing on the body, when it comes to Derrick Henry, he's never had any major injury history, one that's held him out for a significant amount of time. So while that would be a more major concern for other running backs in the top 10, for him, it's in no way a reason we drop him in the rankings. We also have to add in that as opposed to last season where he also finished as a top 5 fantasy back, there were question marks heading into 2020 on whether Ryan Tannehill could keep up his MVP caliber pace that he brought into the 2019 season. I think those questions and concerns have been answered, and with AJ Brown and potentially Corey Davis as well as Jonnu Smith if they return or are replaced, these scoring opportunities should be as high as usual as we head into the 2021 season. We're moving over to the RB4, also the 4th overall pick, none other than Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. Understandably, this is an area where I could see people opting for the side of safety. Saquon Barkley, he played 13 games in the 2019 season, followed that up by only suiting up for 2 games in 2020, and with the potential concerns for this team offensively under Daniel Jones, the lack of high-end receiving talent on that team, it wouldn't be all that surprising for me to see other people opt to draft players like Alvin Kamara, Davante Adams, or Ezekiel Elliott over a player like Saquon Barkley. But regardless, we still value him as the 4th overall pick. We cannot forget exactly how talented and athletically gifted Saquon Barkley is. When it comes to a physicality standpoint, players like Saquon Barkley, they're really a once-in-a-generation type of player. For starters, he's 6 foot, 233 pounds, making him not only one of the largest running backs in the entire league, but a player who's extremely scary for all defenses when you consider that he runs a 4.40. That ranks in the 97th percentile, which is impressive enough as it is, but it doesn't just end there. This is also a player with a 99th percentile speed score, 96th percentile burst score, who coming out of college had one of the best receiving resumes we had seen in recent history. When combining that size and athleticism with his natural breakaway ability, banking on the talent of that player outside of the overall strength of the offense is definitely something we have to take into consideration, but that's also not to say there aren't reasons for us to expect a potential Giants improvement from 2020 to 2021. Daniel Jones stepping into yet another year as the starter. This is also a team that showed flashes down the stretch of having a solid defense, keeping them in games that are not out of control, but even in those types of situations where the game is out of control, this team is down by 2 scores. Saquon Barkley, a player who in his rookie season finished as the RB1 overall, don't expect him to see any less field time. In fact, expect him to be even more utilized in the receiving game than he quite possibly would in games in which they have a lead. Moving into the 5th overall player, the RB5, this is going to be Alvin Kamara of the New Orleans Saints. As I had mentioned earlier with Saquon Barkley, Kamara is definitely a player I could see rise up on a lot of draft boards just due to the safety that he brings as a player in this offense. Alvin Kamara in PPR leagues has finished no worse than the RB9. He's also on an offense that is bringing Drew Brees back for the 2022 season as long as he doesn't retire, and with capable backups at the quarterback position like Taysom Hill, the safety in a player like Alvin Kamara could be higher than some players drafted ahead of him. With that being said though, we do have to understand Alvin Kamara has never eclipsed 1,000 rushing yards. He's never really been a massive volume-based rusher. He's more relied on his efficiency and the touchdowns scored. That fact, as well as what we saw towards the tail end of this season, does give Alvin Kamara more of an illusion of safety than what actually actually meets the eye. When Drew Brees was healthy and the starter, we saw better production from Alvin Kamara. That meaning, if Drew Brees does go down, our week-to-week expectations of the output for Alvin Kamara, it realistically just shouldn't be as high. In addition to that, Alvin Kamara in week 16 had that massive game against Minnesota in which he scored 6 rushing touchdowns. 6 touchdowns is nearly 30% of his production in that area. Those fantasy points, the production in that one game was pushing over 15% of his total season production as well. So for players who may not have made the playoffs and were able to reap the benefits of his championship monster performance, their outlook for the season as Kamara owners in 2020, it may not have been as high as some people from the outside looking in who may have faced them in the championship game. Regardless though, when it comes to ranking these players that are in the top 5, top 10, we're really splitting hairs here. Alvin Kamara, he's one of the safer players you could realistically ask for at the running back position, and with him having a receiver like Michael Thomas, one of the best in the league, lining up with him offensively each and every snap, it means scoring opportunities are not going to be few and far between, and this team is always going to be competing with any teams offensively. Real quick guys, before we get into the back half of the players on this top 10 list, just a reminder, if you guys do enjoy these videos, the best way to show support, all you gotta do is hit that like button. If you do enjoy these videos, make sure you are subscribing. We would really appreciate it. Also, we do want to hear back from you on exactly which players you would have ranked inside the top 10 that maybe we possibly overlooked or that you value more, and let us know exactly why you think that player should be ranked higher or lower on your 2021 draft board. With that said, we're moving to the 6th overall player, the only receiver on this list. That player, it's Davante Adams of the Green Bay Packers. It may surprise some of you to hear that we do have only one wide receiver ranked inside of our top 10, but the reality is wide receivers in running backs, even in PPR leagues, the gap in the high-end production when it comes to the top 3 running backs and top 3 receivers, history has shown there is a bit of a gap in that type of production. However, Davante Adams in 2020 completely smashed that narrative out of the park, finishing as the #1 overall receiver in PPR, half PPR, as well as standard, which is even more impressive when you consider that he only played in 14 games. When comparing his production over to running backs, there was only one player that was able to outscore him on the season. That was actually Alvin Kamara, and with Adams slated to return, a player who's been a proven performer when it comes to red zone production throughout his entire career, an area where he is also assisted by having one of the most efficient quarterbacks in touchdown rate, which should leave no questions as to why we have him the highest ranked wide receiver and even ranked ahead of some of those top tier running backs. Alright guys, we're moving over to the next player, and I do believe there may be a hair of controversy in this ranking over the player we have ranked behind him. Regardless, we would be fine if you flip-flop them in the rankings, but we're going to start with the player ranked as the 7th overall pick, Nick Chubb of the Cleveland Browns. Nick Chubb, over the past 2 seasons, since getting the lion's share of the workload in this backfield, Nick Chubb, he's been very productive, including finishing in PPR leagues as a top 12 running back in back-to-back seasons, top 10 if we're talking standard scoring, which for most people could be a surprise because this team did sign and extend Kareem Hunt, a player who will overall be competing for targets and touches with Nick Chubb as well. Nick Chubb though did prove to have heavy involvement regardless of Kareem Hunt. In fact, with Kareem Hunt on the field, Nick Chubb had some of his most productive games on this season, giving us the confidence in his safety regardless of Kareem Hunt stealing touches or not. There's also a lot of room for improvement in this team offensively. We've seen them have very massive games from an offensive standpoint. We've also seen Baker Mayfield and others around them play poorly. Odell Beckham also getting injured at the early part of this season doesn't help when we're trying to establish what the ceiling of this team would be offensively. But what we do know is that when this team does get into scoring distance inside the 10, inside the 5, few running backs are going to be as heavily utilized as Nick Chubb in that area. For that reason, any improvements to this team offensively are going to directly impact the potential upside of a player like Nick Chubb, who has already proven that even in a season where he's missed 4 games and only suited up for 12, despite that uphill battle, he was still able to produce top 12, top 10 numbers in all scoring formats. We're moving over to our 8th overall ranked player, which is Ezekiel Elliott of the Dallas Cowboys. Like I had mentioned a bit earlier, this is potentially where I can see some of that controversy controversy seeping in. I know a lot of people will feel more comfortable drafting Ezekiel Elliott over Nick Chubb. Ezekiel Elliott has been a consistent and proven performer since entering the league, and with the upside that we did see Dak Prescott bring to the table in his MVP caliber-esque run before getting injured, any running back tied to an offense like that with many scoring opportunities available, the likeliness of them being a top 10, top 5 running back is going to be extremely high. Now up on your screen, I've given the historical finishes of Ezekiel Elliott throughout his career, which will boast his level of safety that he brings to the table each week. We're talking 3 seasons as a top 5 running back in both PPR as well as standard, 5 straight standard finishes inside of the top 12, and with his worst season in PPR finishing as the RB13, that is a season in which it needs to be taken with a grain of salt. He only played in 10 games that year due to suspension. Ezekiel Elliott, while he did get a bit banged up this season, has been healthy throughout his entire career, which may lead you guys to question exactly why we would have any concerns with Ezekiel Elliott or why we have him ranked so low. And to be frank, it all comes down to the health and status of Dak Prescott. We have seen Ezekiel Elliott struggle in an offense that is lacking in scoring opportunities under Andy Dalton. Say what you want about Andy Dalton, but he's a pretty decent backup when compared to other backups and could even be potentially the best option they have if Dak Prescott is not fully recovered to start the season, or if they have any issues in settling the contract. If the contract and health of Dak Prescott as we get closer to the season is showing improvement, if we see signs of him being available to start the season, then by all means, Ezekiel Elliott is going to move up our draft boards. But as it stands, if we're drafting today, we currently have him ranked as the 8th overall player. We're moving over to the 9th overall ranked player, yet again another running back. It's Jonathan Taylor of the Indianapolis Colts. Jonathan Taylor in his rookie season finished as the RB6 in PPR leagues, even better in standard, in which he finished inside the top 5 as the RB4, which is extremely impressive considering the competition for touches and targets that he faced throughout the season. The Indianapolis Colts were dishing out touches and targets to players like Marlon Mack, Jordan Wilkins, as well as Nyheim Hines, who himself finished the season with 76 targets, 63 receptions, and nearly 500 receiving yards. Anytime running backs in your offense are taking away goal line touches or those valuable targets, that is going to limit your overall ceiling, and for a player who gets most of his work on the ground like Jonathan Taylor does, losing those valuable touches also impact your floor as well. When it came to Jonathan Taylor's floor, even in PPR leagues, we saw throughout his first 9 games, in 4 of those first 9 games, he was unable to eclipse double-digit fantasy points, which in PPR leagues, it's not going to get it done, but we really saw him have a tale of 2 seasons when factoring that during the second half of the year, he completely popped off. Through the final 5 weeks of the season, Jonathan Taylor posted his 5 best fantasy performances. This also coincided with this offense looking much better playing under Phillip Rivers, a team that had developed more chemistry as the season went on. But even if Phillip Rivers doesn't return, Jonathan Taylor and his fantasy value is not essentially tied to the quarterback play. Phillip Rivers himself, while he didn't play terrible, there were certain times where the plays of Phillip Rivers were at the detriment of Jonathan Taylor. But overall, this is a Colts team that is very defensive oriented. It's well coached. The majority of their games, the Colts are going to be in the lead or within 1 score of their opponent. In those types of games, the upside for a rusher on the ground is going to be much higher. The potential touches that Jonathan Taylor can rack up in the 3rd and the 4th quarter, they're going to bring in a ton of upside. And we cannot forget the promise that he did show in the receiving game, an area where he caught an impressive 36 of 39 targets. You don't need me to tell you that's one of the better catch rates in the entire league last season. So expecting Jonathan Taylor to see even more opportunities in that area, even with Nyheim Hines, it's a very likely scenario. We're moving into the final player we have ranked inside the top 10. It shouldn't come as too much of a surprise because it's the player in the thumbnail. We haven't spoken about him yet. Yes, that's right. It's Travis Kelce of the Kansas City Chiefs. When it comes to Travis Kelce, this has been a player continuously climbing up our draft boards for what feels like 8 seasons now. But at this point for 2021, Travis Kelce legitimately needs to be looked at as a complete difference maker. Up on your screen, I've posted his fantasy finishes at the tight end position, dating all the way back to 2016. No, this isn't a typo. Travis Kelce has been the #1 overall tight end in PPR scoring scoring formats for every season, and in standard, there has only been one season in which Travis Kelce did not finish first overall. His track record alone should give us the confidence in the safety of his pick, especially at a position that brings in such high variance. But what's even more impressive is that Travis Kelce is now coming off of his best statistical season, a season in which a tight end eclipsed over 1,400 receiving yards, double-digit touchdowns, and that was despite only playing in 15 games. That directly indicates there was some level of production left on the field, but regardless, anybody who did own Travis Kelce for 2020 can attest that they likely made a deep run into the playoffs or made it at least to the championship game or won, and with Travis Kelce averaging over 10 points per game over the TE6 and below, not much of a case needs to be made on how much of a difference maker he truly is. But guys, that's going to do it for this video. We really hoped you enjoyed. If you did, how about hitting that like button? If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. We thank you all for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.